My life hadn't always revolved around deadlines and late-night coding. I grew up in a small, sleepy town where technology was an afterthought, and my fascination with computers made me a bit of an oddball. As a kid, I spent hours dismantling and reassembling old electronics my father salvaged from his job at the local recycling plant. By the time I was 10, I'd built my first functional computer, a Frankenstein's monster of spare parts that somehow booted into a clunky operating system. In high school, my interest turned into an obsession. I spent long nights coding simple games and learning programming languages from dusty library books. Despite my parents' initial reservations, they supported my passion, even when it meant spending money we didn't have on better equipment. Those years cemented my dream. I wanted to build software that could change lives. When I landed my first job at a small startup, I thought I'd made it. The work was demanding and the pay was modest, but the thrill of creating something from nothing was addictive. That's where I met Sophie. She was a graphic designer with an eye for detail and a smile that could light up the dreariest of days. We bonded over our shared ambition and quickly became inseparable. Our early years together were filled with hope and determination. We poured everything into our careers, supporting each other through long nights and early mornings. When our daughter Amelia was born, it felt like the culmination of all our efforts. I vowed to provide her with the stability I never had growing up. But ambition has a price. As my career advanced, the demands grew. Sophie often shouldered the responsibility of raising Amelia alone while I worked endless hours to meet deadlines. Over time, the cracks began to show. What started as occasional arguments over time spent apart turned into something deeper. A rift neither of us seemed willing or able to mend. Still, I believed we could weather any storm. I was wrong. The day had been exhausting. Once again, my team and I worked late into the night, as these intense work periods demanded everything we had. As the lead developer, I felt a duty to stay engaged at all times, often being the last one to leave. Tonight was no different. After setting the building's security system, I made my way through the dimly lit parking lot toward my crimson BMW 650i Coupe, ready for the brief drive home. My mind raced with thoughts about the project's current state. Bug counts had finally begun to decrease. Although there were still hundreds to address, our pace had stabilized, and the team seemed to be managing the pressure. In just a fortnight, we'd be ready to deliver the Goldmaster. As I crossed the lot, a sharp noise cut through my thoughts. Footsteps. With no music playing in the car, the sound was clear. I turned, startled, and froze as a firearm was aimed directly at me. Acting instinctively, I ducked, but not quickly enough. The Colt discharged and a sharp, burning pain surged through my chest as a bullet shattered my shoulder. The force hurled me backward into the trunk of a nearby car, and I crumpled to the pavement. Under the stark glow of the streetlights, the assailant stood silently. Another shot rang out. Then another. I couldn't tell how many. A second bullet slammed into my side, piercing my lower rib. My vision blurred, and my body weakened. As the shooter stepped closer, I knew it was the end. Thoughts of my wife, Sophie, and my daughter Amelia filled my mind. Regret consumed me. Regret for the long nights, the time missed with them. Voices called out in the distance, but I couldn't focus. The Colt fired once more, hitting my left leg. Then the shooter fled. Moments later, a familiar face appeared, Nora, our graphic designer. She leaned over me, her mouth moving, though I couldn't make out the words. Soon, Daniel, our assistant producer, and Steve, our AI programmer, joined her. Their faces swam with concern, but my strength was slipping away. I clung to the sight of Nora's face until the world went dark. When I regained consciousness, pain blazed in my chest. I was in a hospital bed, staring at a stranger holding defibrillator paddles. I'd been dead, but somehow they'd brought me back. The next time I woke, the pain was duller but still constant. A nurse was working on my leg, adjusting it where the bullet had struck. I tried to speak, but my throat was parched, and only a raspy grunt emerged. Noticing I was awake, the nurse immediately called for a doctor. As the hours passed, I began to piece things together. I'd been in the hospital for 10 months. My daughter Amelia had visited early on, but hadn't been back in 6 months. Sophie's whereabouts were a mystery. No one could tell me anything about her or what had happened after the shooting. My medical file included a note to notify the police once I was awake, and soon 2 detectives arrived. "Mr. William Blackwood?" the older of the 2 began. I nodded. He introduced himself as Detective Ethan Hayes with his partner, Dario Bossi. They wanted to discuss the night I was attacked. I shared the fragmented details I could recall, but the questioning quickly took a strange turn. "Mr. Blackwood, were you aware your wife was having an affair?" Bosie asked bluntly, earning a sharp glance from Hayes. "What? An affair?" I stammered. "Sophie wouldn't do that. Where is she? She can clear this up." Hayes spoke carefully. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but she was. Her lover was Isaac Gall. Does that name mean anything to you?" The name hit me like a punch. "Isaac Gall. My daughter's middle school English teacher?" Hayes nodded. "That's where they likely met. Did you know he lost his teaching job?" I shook my head stunned. None of it made sense. Sophie had been my everything. After Amelia was born, we were inseparable. I worked tirelessly to give them a good life. How could this be happening? Hayes continued. "Gall was dismissed for having a relationship with an 18-year-old student. It wasn't illegal, but violated school policies. He struggled to find work after that. When his father passed, he took over the family coffee shop." "G Cafe," I murmured. Sophie often raved about their coffee. "Exactly," Hayes confirmed. "We believe they reconnected there." "That tracks," I admitted. "She went there a lot. Personally, I thought their coffee tasted awful." Hayes nodded. "The business wasn't profitable either, barely breaking even." I shook my head in disbelief. "I still don't believe it. Just because she went there often doesn't mean she was involved with him." Hayes leaned forward, his expression serious. "Let's set that aside for now. Does your house have a security system?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "What kind?" he pressed. "Basic," I said. "Alarms on doors, motion sensors downstairs, and a connection to the alarm company. No cameras." "No cameras?" Hayes repeated, raising an eyebrow. I shook my head. "No, I've never trusted the idea of recordings being stored on some company's servers. Too many hacks." "Did you install any yourself?" Hayes asked, his tone probing. "No," I said firmly. "The only cameras in the house are my DSLR and the webcams on our laptops." "Why?" Hayes hesitated before answering. "We found a hidden DVR system in your basement, recording weeks of footage before the shooting." My stomach dropped. "Who put it there?" I demanded, leaning forward. "We thought it was you," Hayes said, his eyes narrowing. "The recordings suggest otherwise." "What was on them?" I asked, my voice tight. "Evidence of the affair," Hayes said evenly, "and proof your wife and her lover planned the attack on you." The revelation twisted like a knife in my gut. "You're saying there's footage of them together?" I asked, struggling to process. "She wanted me dead for money? For what? A life insurance payout?" Hayes nodded grimly. "Yes, she convinced herself you were unfaithful. They planned to take everything, including $1 million policy." I frowned, shaking my head in disbelief. "That's not possible. I don't even have a policy like that." "It was taken out 2 years ago," Hayes clarified. 2 years, I repeated, my voice trailing off. Was the affair really that old? The thought burned, but it didn't matter now. I pushed it aside. "Where are they now?" I asked, focusing on the present. "Gall fled to Mexico after questioning," Hayes explained. "He later took his own life, leaving behind a confession. Your wife disappeared. No one's seen or heard from her since." "No contact? No activity at all?" I pressed. "None," Hayes confirmed. "No calls, no banking, nothing." I felt a wave of exhaustion, but kept my voice steady. "And my daughter? She hasn't visited in months." "She moved west for college," Hayes replied. "We'll confirm her location." "University of Washington?" I asked, trying to recall the last conversation I had with her. "She talked about going there." Hayes didn't confirm, but offered a reassuring nod. "We'll verify her details," he said. I sat back, exhaling slowly as the weight of the situation settled over me. "Looks like I've got 3 mysteries to solve," I muttered to myself. "3?" Hayes asked, tilting his head. "Where my wife is," I said, ticking the items off mentally. "Who installed those cameras? And what happened to Ryan Carter, my daughter's boyfriend?" Hayes smirked. "That last one's on you. We'll handle the rest." The next morning, I was transferred from the long-term care facility back to the hospital to begin rehabilitation. The nurses seemed cheerful. I got the impression that most patients there didn't leave under their own power. At the nurses' station in the new ward, I spotted my daughter, her face streaked with tears. Her expression shifted rapidly from shock to joy as she realized I was awake. Overcome with emotion, she rushed to my side, kissed my cheek, held my hand, and told me how relieved she was that I had survived. A nurse gently ushered her back to the station while they settled me into my room. Watching her alone, the weight of the detective's words hit me again. My wife's betrayal wasn't a lie. She'd cheated on me and conspired to have me liquidated. For a fleeting moment, I had clung to the hope that none of it was true, that she'd return, and we could rebuild our family. But seeing Amelia's face solidified the harsh reality. "How've you been holding up?" I asked once she joined me in the room. She smirked wryly. "Oh, I've been fine. Just living my life while you've been snoozing through the year. Too bad playing Sleeping Beauty didn't do anything for your looks." For the first time since waking, I let out a laugh. "Seriously, though, how are you? How did you manage to get through everything?" I asked, my tone softening. "I'm good, Dad." "Really?" she replied, her voice steady but sincere. "But you're the one who should be answering that, not me." She hesitated for a moment, then continued. "Nora from your office was my lifeline. She moved in with me, got me through Thanksgiving, Christmas, graduation, and college prep. She even fought social services to become my legal guardian. Her rent kept the bills paid. She really stepped up when I needed her most." I nodded, my heart full of gratitude. "I've always liked Nora. I'm glad she was there for you. What about Ryan?" Her expression darkened. "Ryan didn't approve of how much time I spent at the hospital. He wanted to use the empty house as our space. A week after you were shot, he bailed. Never called, never texted. His friend told me he lost his job and moved in with his parents, but that's a lie. His parents died years ago. I asked around and he just disappeared." "Good riddance," I said firmly. "You're better off without him." She rolled her eyes. "Why didn't you say that back then?" "Your mom thought I'd just push you closer to him if I did." Her jaw tightened. "Next time, trust me enough to tell me what you really think. Mom was wrong about so much." "I'll remember that," I promised. "Promise?" she pressed. "Promise," I said, smiling. "Good," she replied with a satisfied nod. "So anyone new in your life?" "Not yet," she admitted. "There's someone I'm interested in, but we'll see what happens when I get back to school." "What are you studying?" I asked. "Computer engineering, mostly hardware. I just built a digital scale with a pressure sensor and LEDs. It worked perfectly on the first try." I smiled proudly, but her mention of school tugged at memories of her mother's brilliance. My expression must have changed, because Amelia's brow furrowed. "What is it, Dad?" she asked softly. "Just some old memories." "About Mom?" she guessed, her voice laced with bitterness. I nodded. "She was brilliant, too. I think you get your smarts from her." Her eyes flashed with anger. "No, I don't. I get them from you. Mom's only good for rotting in hell." I flinched at her words but pressed on. "Amelia, what happened after I got shot? Is all this anger just from finding out what she did?" She folded her arms and looked away. "Her trying to eliminate you is enough, don't you think?" Her voice was sharp, but then it softened as she continued. "But yeah, she changed after the shooting. At first, she was devoted. She stayed at the hospital constantly. She sent me home to shower and change and barely left your side, but after a week, when you didn't wake up, she became different." Amelia's voice tightened as she recounted the events. "She started dressing up, skipping hospital visits. I'd come by after school and find out she hadn't been there all day." I listened in silence as she continued, her words carrying the weight of painful memories. When the police started asking questions, she got paranoid. She acted like someone was following her. She changed her routines, avoided talking to anyone. Then, one morning, she dropped me at school like usual, but when I got home, she wasn't there. I called the hospital, and they said she hadn't visited you. That's when I realized something was really wrong." Amelia paused, taking a deep breath before finishing. "That night, Nora called to check on me like she always did when she couldn't visit you. I told her Mom was missing, and she came over immediately. She even stayed the night. The next morning, we went to the police. They searched the house, and that's when everything unraveled." Amelia hesitated, looking at me carefully. "Dad, did you know there were cameras hidden in the basement?" "No," I said firmly. "I had no idea. I don't know who put them there, but I wish I did. Maybe they could have warned me about her affair, or what she was planning." She nodded slowly. "So you didn't install them?" "No," I said again. "Whoever did might have saved my life if they'd spoken up." "Did you know her lover?" she asked, her tone sharp with curiosity. I nodded reluctantly. "I did. He was my middle school teacher, but I hadn't seen him since I graduated." I hesitated before asking, "What happened after the police found the videos?" "They took the recordings," she said, her voice tightening, "but they wouldn't tell us what was on them. A detective told me to call if Mom contacted me, then just left. A social worker came by and said they'd notified child services since I was alone." She paused, taking a steadying breath. "That's when Nora stepped in. She told them I wasn't alone and moved in immediately. Your company helped her get a lawyer, and she fought to become my legal guardian until I turned 18. Her voice shifted, tinged with bitterness. But after that, they just left. No counseling, no follow-up. They completely dropped the ball. Her voice trembled with frustration. I could hear the pain beneath her words, not just at the system's failures, but at the deep sense of abandonment. Even though she understood I hadn't chosen to leave her, the wounds were still raw. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I said, tears brimming in my eyes. "If I could have been there for you, I would have." Her face softened and tears slid down her cheeks. "I know, Dad. I know you would have. Knowing you were fighting to survive kept me going. I couldn't give up because you didn't. And Nora, she made everything okay. She paid the bills, helped me finish school, picked out my college, and even came with me for orientation. I'm so grateful for her," I said. "Where is Nora now?" "She's at work," Amelia replied. "She stopped by this morning when she heard you were moved out of the care facility. She'll be back tonight. Oh, and she's still living at the house." "I'm glad," I said. "She's been incredible." "She made sure you were okay for me," Amelia added. "I wouldn't have gone to UW if she hadn't promised to check on you every week. You needed to follow your dreams," I said. "If UW was where you wanted to be, I'm glad you went. Your grandfather would be so proud. It was his alma mater. He always wanted me to go there, but life had other plans." Before she could say anything, a doctor arrived to check on me and approve my start in physical therapy. Once he was done, a nurse pulled Amelia aside, probably to discuss my discharge plan and the kind of help I'd need after leaving the hospital. That left me alone to wrestle with my thoughts. Anger welled up as I thought about my wife's betrayal. She had abandoned Amelia when our daughter needed her the most. Sure, Amelia was technically an adult, but no one should have to face the loss of both parents. One in a coma and the other gone by choice. It wasn't fair. Nora stepping in had been a blessing, but Amelia shouldn't have been left to rely on anyone else in the first place. I was still struggling to make sense of it all. The idea that my wife had not only cheated on me, but also plotted my homicide, felt like something out of a nightmare. Part of me wanted to see the evidence the police had mentioned, those hidden camera recordings, just to erase any shred of doubt. But I knew deep down that her disappearance was all the proof I needed. Why had she done it? Was it because I wasn't home enough? She had always claimed to understand the demands of my job. We had good times during my breaks between projects. I had even planned to take an extended leave after this one, nearly 2 months off to spend the holidays together. Maybe that was the problem. She knew I'd be home more, making it harder for her to sneak off to see him. Did she actually love him? Or was he just a convenient escape? Perhaps my absence had left a void he was able to fill. Then, with his lack of prospects, they decided to take everything I had built for our family. The problem with that theory was that it didn't align with the woman I thought I knew. Unless she was found, I'd probably never understand why she did it. And even if the authorities tracked her down, there was no guarantee she'd tell me the truth. It was better to focus on the present, on healing and being there for Amelia. Amelia returned after speaking with the nurse, and we shifted to lighter topics. She shared stories about her classes and projects, updates about where her friends had gone to college, and tales of her new friends in Seattle. She described attending Washington Huskies football games and catching Seattle Thunderbirds hockey matches. Her energy was infectious, and for a while I felt like everything was normal again. Later, Nora arrived with news from the office. She shared gossip about the project we'd been working on before the shooting and updates on the sequel to my last game. Apparently, the new project was facing major challenges. Daniel had left to take a producer role in the Bay Area, and his departure revealed who on the team had been doing the real work all along. Management finally had proof of what I'd told them before, though Mike, our producer, was trying to shift the blame onto Daniel's replacement. A rookie assistant producer Mike had hired, who came from a medical software company and had no experience in gaming. Nora mentioned that she was considering quitting to pursue her own projects, which made me wonder if she'd stayed this long only to support Amelia and me. I decided I'd need to talk to her about it when Amelia wasn't around. After a few hours of talking, we were all yawning and decided to call it a night. As Amelia and Nora headed toward the door, a question popped into my mind. Something I hadn't asked yet. "Amelia," I called after her, "did you come straight here from the airport?" She turned back and nodded. "Yes, Dad." "Where's your suitcase?" I asked, glancing around. "At the nurse's station," she replied with a smile. I chuckled softly. "Okay, love you. See you tomorrow." "I love you too," she said before stepping out with Nora. Amelia smiled as she walked out, missing the quick kiss Nora blew me before following her. I didn't have time to react before she was gone. As it turned out, I had woken up at the perfect time for Amelia. It was just before her school's reading week, right before finals. She'd worked with one of her professors to arrange for her exams to be proctored at a nearby state university about an hour away. The only condition was that she take them at the same time as her classmates, which meant a few late-night tests. Still, it allowed her to stay with me. She spent her days at my bedside, surrounded by her laptop and textbooks. I helped quiz her when she asked, walking through solutions as if they were programming challenges. It was a welcome distraction from my situation, and more importantly, it brought us closer than we'd ever been. Physical therapy, on the other hand, was brutal. Those first 2 weeks left me drained. I shuffled down parallel bars on shaky legs, using them for support whenever I needed. But the hard work paid off. I was cleared to go home just in time for Thanksgiving. Amelia and I had dinner at a nearby hotel since Nora was in Florida visiting her family. Returning to the house didn't feel like coming home. Instead, it felt like walking into the aftermath of a crime. Every room seemed haunted by memories of my wife's betrayal. With Nora out of town, I avoided the master bedroom and slept in the guest room instead. The faint trace of Nora's scent on the pillow was oddly comforting, a reminder of someone who had been there for us. But I knew I couldn't stay in this house. I needed a fresh start. A clean break from the memories, both good and bad, that lingered in those walls. The day after Thanksgiving, I called a real estate agent to start the process of selling the house. He warned me that it was a slow market, especially during the holiday season, so I shouldn't expect a quick sale. It might take until the new year, but I was determined to move on. The following Monday, I reached out to my office and arranged to work from home. My new role was focused on debugging. I'd sift through the bug database, coordinate with whoever had been assigned each issue, and help them work out solutions over Skype. Most of them welcomed the extra help, especially since debugging wasn't their primary focus. On Tuesday, Nora dropped off a work laptop and a console for me to use. After my morning trip to the hospital for physical therapy, I spent the afternoon diving into bug fixes. It felt good to be contributing again, even if I wasn't physically in the office. Working alongside Amelia, who asked questions and joined the problem-solving process, made the experience surprisingly enjoyable. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was moving forward. On Wednesday, Amelia and I woke up early to get her to the airport for her flight back to school. Saying goodbye was tough. Tears flowed as we hugged, and it felt like I was losing her all over again. She didn't want to leave either, especially after just getting me back. But we reassured each other. She'd be back soon for Christmas. As I drove home, I started thinking that a change of scenery might do me good. Maybe I'd follow her to the West Coast once I found a new job. The week before Christmas, I returned to work officially. The day before, I'd attended the office Christmas party with Nora as my date. Not romantically, though. She had a long-term boyfriend, but strangely, he never visited the house, and she never stayed at his place. It was something I planned to ask her about someday. Christmas itself was a bright spot. Amelia and I spent it together, just the two of us, and we made the most of it. A few days later, on the 27th, we drove into Philadelphia to watch a Flyers game. It was her gift to me, but it felt like a shared present. We both loved hockey. As the new year rolled in, Amelia returned to school, and Nora came back from Florida after visiting her family. My physical therapy was now down to weekly sessions, giving me more time to focus on moving forward. That same week, the police dropped by with the camera equipment they had confiscated, the storage device and the cameras. They'd cloned the footage for their records, which was all they needed as evidence. They told me the system had been purchased at a Costco in Baltimore, then returned and resold at a discount warehouse for cash. Unfortunately, that's where the trail went cold. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to review the footage. Downloading the software proved challenging since the company no longer supported the system, and their updated programs didn't recognize the old hardware. After some digging, I found an older version on an abandonware site. It wasn't perfect. The connection to the hardware would cut out intermittently, but it worked well enough to view the videos. In hindsight, I wished I hadn't watched. The software displayed a timeline at the bottom with a list of cameras at the top. When footage was available, the interface expanded to show the video feed. If multiple cameras were active, it showed 4 feeds at once, and you could switch between them. I started scrolling through the footage, initially seeing the police combing through the house, room by room, before unplugging the system. Then I rewound to find footage of my wife and her lover. The scene began with Sophie pacing in the living room like a restless animal. The doorbell rang and she opened the door to let him in. He entered, carrying a child's Spider-Man backpack. From it, he pulled out the Colt, the same Colt he had used to shoot me. The sight of it made my shoulder throb as if I'd been hit all over again. "It's here," he said, showing her the weapon. Sophie was quick to respond. "I don't want him to suffer. Promise me it'll be quick and painless." He chuckled, clearly enjoying himself. "Don't worry, I'm a pro, he won't hear a thing. One shot to the back of the head and it's over." "Enough talking," she said, moving closer to him. "You owe me some attention before you go." At that moment, any shred of doubt I'd clung to about her innocence shattered. They kissed passionately, shedding their clothes as they moved from the living room to the sofa. I couldn't watch any longer and fast-forwarded through their encounter, but it only got worse. Later, they were in the shower together, which started innocently but soon turned into something else. Eventually, he left. I checked the timestamps. He had waited outside my office for hours after leaving the house. Sophie, meanwhile, sat calmly in the living room watching TV. Around 11 p.m., Amelia came home and went straight to bed. At 1:30 a.m., I called Sophie to let her know I was on my way home. Shortly after hanging up, she called him to give the green light. I felt physically ill. She had orchestrated my attempted homicide as casually as ordering takeout. Scrubbing through more footage, I confirmed what the police had already told me. It was just him. Still, I couldn't help but notice their pattern of behavior. They had taken great delight in desecrating spaces that were personal to me. The marital bed, my office desk, the basement, and even my car. That last discovery hit particularly hard. Sophie had only used my car once all year to take it for servicing, and apparently she'd taken the opportunity to have Zex in it. From that moment, I knew I needed to get out of the house and start fresh. I couldn't even bring myself to drive the car in the garage. If I wasn't working or doing rehab, I spent my time packing up her belongings. Clothes, trinkets, and anything else tied to her were boxed up and donated to a local thrift store. That same day, the store manager called to tell me they had found $100 in the pocket of one of her jeans and wanted to return it. I told him to put it in their donation box or give it to another charity. Once I'd purged the house of most of her presents, I contacted a lawyer. The first meeting was disheartening. Since no one knew where Sophie was, I couldn't file for a quick divorce. Instead, I had to start the tedious process of trying to locate her, filing Freedom of Information Act requests, and working through red tape, even though the police were already searching for her. Frustrated, I left the lawyer's office in a fury, venting my anger on some unfortunate inanimate objects before calming down. Thankfully, the lawyer was understanding and let me come back to continue the discussion. I apologized for my outburst and asked him to proceed with the divorce paperwork. I didn't care how long it took. I just wanted this chapter of my life to be over. As summer rolled around, Amelia came home for her break. By then, the house had sold and I'd secured a new job. I was moving to Redmond, Washington to work for a tech giant, an opportunity that many in the industry jokingly referred to as joining the evil empire or the Borg. I didn't know much about the project I'd be working on, except that the team had contributed to the creation of the Xbox Kinect. My 3 interview trips in the spring had been a silver lining, giving me a chance to visit Amelia while also preparing for a fresh start. Those trips also led me to meet Professor Susan Chikongo. Susan, the daughter of a Namibian refugee, had recently accepted a teaching position at the University of Washington and was in town searching for a home. She was moving from Los Angeles, hoping to settle in before the fall semester began. Our paths crossed, quite literally, when I stepped off an elevator as she tried to step on. After an awkward laugh, she invited me for a drink at the hotel bar. One drink turned into a conversation, which led to a night together in her room. Susan was bold and passionate in ways that made me feel alive again. It was impossible not to compare her energy to Sophie's, whose demeanor with me had been subdued, but far more assertive with her lover, as I'd painfully witnessed on the hidden camera footage. That thought brought tears to my eyes. Susan noticed, and instead of pulling away, she comforted me. When I opened up about my past, she listened without judgment. We stayed up talking until dawn, and afterward, we made love again, this time with a closeness that felt deeper than anything I'd experienced in years. We parted ways after breakfast, exchanging contact information. By the time I landed back home, Susan had already sent emails with updates about her house hunting adventures, complete with photos. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly happy. But that happiness didn't last. When I got home, Nora immediately sensed something was different about me. I told her about meeting Susan and how much we'd clicked. She seemed genuinely happy for me, but then excused herself for a date with her boyfriend. Over the next few weeks, she became increasingly distant. She didn't stay at the house and eventually went to HR at work to hand in her 2 weeks' notice. On her last Saturday in town, she showed up with a U-Haul, packed up her things, and left without much fanfare. Not long after, movers came to pack up my belongings for the move to Seattle. My last night in Pennsylvania was spent at a hotel near the airport. The company had arranged for temporary housing in Redmond, a small apartment near Marymore Park, while I got settled and decided where to live. Eventually, I found a 3-bedroom apartment in the area, and as fate would have it, Susan had bought a house nearby on the other side of the park. We started dating casually, meeting a few nights a week and playing in a Sunday morning pickup soccer game at the park. Susan was an incredible athlete, easily outmaneuvering most of the guys on the field. She had a mix of experience and speed that left even younger players struggling to keep up. But as time went on, it became clear our relationship wasn't built to last. One evening, Susan confronted me. "You're still holding on to someone else," she said. "I'm over my wife," I replied, though the words felt hollow even to me. The relationship ended in the weeks leading up to my first Christmas on the West Coast. Susan made sure the breakup was definitive. She arranged for me to catch her in bed with one of her students. It was her house, not mine. But I'd started to think of it as ours. Seeing her betrayal crushed me, and I decided I was done with relationships for the foreseeable future. I wanted to focus on my career, my daughter, and finding some new hobbies. Skiing became my outlet. On weekends, I drove to Stevens Pass to learn how to navigate the slopes. It was one of the few activities that distracted me from my job, which was turning out to be far less enjoyable than I'd hoped. At the tech giant, your dedication was measured by how long you stayed at your desk. The deadlines were relentless, and overtime wasn't just encouraged. It was expected. If you wanted to keep your job or move up, you practically had to live on campus. The excitement I'd once felt about the role quickly evaporated. Since the shooting 2 years earlier, I'd felt like my life had been moving around me while I stood stuck in place. People had tried to help, like Nora, but I hadn't been ready. Susan had nearly pulled me out of the pit, only to push me back in with her actions. In the new year, I finally bought a house in Kirkland, a 4-bedroom home with a converted garage that had once been used as an office for a failed startup. The backyard had a small garden and a pool, which I didn't think I'd use, but figured Amelia might enjoy when she visited. Settling into the house brought a sense of stability I hadn't felt in years. Once my movers delivered the rest of my belongings from storage, the space started to feel like my own. Still, unpacking boxes from the old house was bittersweet, and I braced myself for the memories that would inevitably surface as I tried to move forward. Sunday evening, after taking Saturday off to move into my new house, I returned home to find an unfamiliar blue Ford Focus parked in my driveway. My curiosity was piqued as I stepped out of my car. The driver's door of the Focus opened, and a pair of long, shapely legs, clad in black stockings, emerged. I froze, recognizing them instantly. I couldn't stop staring at those legs and the hem of a little black dress. My gaze stayed locked there, afraid to look up and meet the eyes of the woman they belonged to. Part of me worried about her reaction to my obvious admiration, and the physical response it stirred in me. A sharp cough, unmistakably male, snapped me out of my reverie. I looked up to see Daniel standing on the other side of the car, smirking. My eyes darted between him and Nora, who was now stepping out of the car, a radiant smile lighting up her face. My mind raced. Were they a couple now? The thought sent a pang through me. I should have been happy for my friends, but instead, I felt an unexpected sadness. "William, God, it's so good to see you," Daniel said as he pulled me into a tight hug. "You're looking great, up and moving around again." "It's good to see you too," I replied, though my eyes were still glued to Nora. "She missed you too, you know," Daniel whispered, leaning in conspiratorially. That broke my trance. I glanced at him and quietly asked, "Are you two together?" He chuckled. "I wish. Believe me, I've tried." "What are you boys whispering about?" Nora called out. "Nothing," we answered in unison, like guilty kids. Nora turned to me. "So, how's Susan?" "No idea. We broke up," I said. Her smile widened. "Good. She wasn't the right fit for you?" "Well, like my ex-wife, she cheated. At least this time I walked away without any extra holes in me." Nora stepped closer, her eyes sparkling. You just need to let a woman decide you're right for her, instead of the other way around. Is that so? Know any women who might think I'm worth it? I asked, half joking. Her response was anything but a joke. She moved in, wrapping her arms around me, and kissed me like her life depended on it. Time seemed to freeze as I lost myself in that kiss, until we were interrupted by a familiar voice. "It's about time!" Amelia shouted, grinning ear to ear. Nora and I broke apart, both breathless, to see Amelia standing a few feet away, her expression filled with delight. Daniel stood next to her, sharing the same amused grin. I had no idea how long they'd been standing there, but judging by the looks on their faces, it had been more than a moment. "What's with the dress?" I asked Nora, trying to steer the conversation back to something less embarrassing. She laughed. "My suitcase got rerouted to Chicago, and some kid threw up on my clothes during the flight. Thankfully, I had this dress in my carry-on. It's from an awards show I attended right before heading to the airport. The puked-on clothes are in a bag in the car. I'm debating whether to clean them or give them a proper burial. Bring them in. I'll clean them for you," I offered. Her smile softened. "William, I need to tell you something before Daniel and I share our other news." "Go ahead," I said, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "I love you," she said, her eyes searching mine. "I've loved you since our first project together, but you were married. Amelia told me to confess after you woke up, but I couldn't. I was too scared. But now I can't wait any longer. I don't want to lose you." Hearing those words unlocked something in me. "I love you too," I admitted. The moment I said it, I knew it was true. It felt right, like the moment I first saw Amelia as a baby. After that, Daniel explained how he and Nora had reconnected at a gaming awards show in Chicago. He had been scouting for talent to build a new team, and Nora, frustrated with her job, was there to network. The two hit it off professionally, and when Amelia told them how miserable I was at work, they decided to pitch the idea of starting a company together. They'd flown in to share the news and invite me to join them. That's how Tribus Games was born. When I showed them the converted garage in my new house, it was immediately designated as our first office. Daniel and Nora agreed to move in temporarily. The house had 4 bedrooms, one for me, one for Amelia, and one each for them. "I hope you're not offering me a guest room," Nora teased. Confused, I looked at her. "Why not?" Amelia jumped in, saving me. "He just doesn't want to assume you'd want to share the master bedroom with him." Realization dawned, and I turned to Nora. "I'd love to share with you, if you think you can handle me." She laughed, playfully punched my arm, then leaned in to whisper in my ear. "Oh, I can handle you. The question is, can you handle me?" I swallowed hard. Everyone else laughed. Daniel left around 10 p.m. to catch a flight back to the Bay Area and begin the process of relocating. As we watched him drive off, I turned to Nora. "What about you? When's your flight?" She smiled mischievously. "I don't have one. I bought a one-way ticket." "What about your things?" I asked. "I'll have my parents send them here," she replied with a grin. When we returned to the house, Amelia had turned off the lights and gone to bed. "It's getting late," I said to Nora. "Bedtime?" "As long as you don't expect to get much sleep," she quipped. In the bedroom, she veered into the bathroom to shower while I tried to distract myself with a book. The title was fitting, Time Enough for Love, but I couldn't focus. My thoughts were on Nora, and for the first time in years, I felt like my life was falling into place. The sound of running water stopped, and moments later, the bathroom door creaked open. Nora stepped out, wrapped in a towel that hugged her curves. She was breathtaking, from her pale blue painted toes to her flowing strawberry blonde hair. My gaze lingered, drinking in the sight before me. My brain, still reeling, noted that her nails and towel were perfectly color-coordinated. Somehow, this small detail made her even more striking. I pinched myself to snap out of it and discreetly checked to ensure I wasn't openly drooling. Thankfully, I wasn't, but my dumbstruck expression gave me away. Nora smirked, her eyes twinkling with amusement before letting out a full, melodious laugh. "Go take a shower," she teased. "Maybe it'll help clear your head." I nodded mutely, climbing off the bed with all the grace of a baby giraffe. My heel caught on a book I didn't remember dropping, causing me to stumble. As I passed her on my way to the bathroom, her scent, my soap and shampoo, wrapped around me. The simple act of her using my things felt intimate, grounding me in the moment. On impulse, I leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her neck, pouring all the affection I could into that small gesture. She melted against the doorframe, releasing a soft groan as I whispered, "Looks like I'm not the only one overwhelmed now." Once in the bathroom, I dropped my clothes in the hamper atop hers, grinning at the thought of sharing even this mundane part of life with her. I was overwhelmed by her beauty, intelligence, and spirit. The mere memory of her standing there stirred something in me, leaving me feeling like a teenager with an overactive imagination. A cold shower became a necessity, shocking me back to reality. When I returned to the bedroom, towel-dried and refreshed, Nora greeted me with a kiss, warm and inviting. She took my hand and guided me to the bed, where she wrapped her arms around me and rested her head against my chest. We stood there quietly, savoring the closeness, the moment so pure and comforting that for the first time in years, I felt completely at home. More than that, I felt whole. This felt right in a way my past never had. We tumbled onto the bed, our kisses deepening as we explored each other, learning each curve and contour. It was intoxicating, the way she tasted, the way her skin felt, the sounds she made. I focused entirely on her, and in return, she gave herself fully to me. As the intensity of our connection grew, she let out a gasp of joy, her emotions spilling over. "I've never felt like this," she said, her voice trembling with wonder. "It's overwhelming, but in the best way." "You've opened my eyes to something new too," I told her, grinning. "This connection, it's unlike anything I've ever known." She laughed softly, pulling me closer. "Come here," she whispered, her words filled with warmth and affection. The night unfolded in a perfect rhythm of love and passion. Every touch, every kiss, every look conveyed emotions words couldn't express. The world outside seemed to fade until only we remained, caught in a timeless moment of shared closeness and trust. At the height of our connection, as we both reached a crescendo of shared intensity, Nora let out a triumphant cry that mirrored my own. It was a moment of pure harmony, leaving us breathless and exhilarated. She collapsed onto me afterward, accidentally bumping her forehead into my nose. We both burst into laughter, the sound blending with the quiet of the room. The air was filled with the scent of our shared passion as we lay tangled together, our heartbeats sinking, our bodies slick with sweat. Slowly, our breathing steadied, and we drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. When I woke the next morning, Nora was still curled up against me, her face radiant with happiness. Her deep blue eyes sparkled with mischief as she teased. "Round two?" "As much as I'd love to," I replied, laughing. "I need to take care of something first." She giggled and slid off me, allowing me to get up and take care of business. When I returned, we made love again, this time slow, tender, and filled with quiet intensity. Afterward, we shared a shower, laughing and stealing kisses, before heading to the kitchen to join Amelia for breakfast. "He didn't eliminate you then?" Amelia teased as we sat down. "I almost called emergency at one point." In an exaggerated whisper, she asked Nora, "So, was it everything you hoped for?" Nora grinned, kissing Amelia on the cheek before leaning in to whisper something. Whatever it was, it made Amelia beam with delight, leaving me feeling smug and grateful all at once. The rest of the day was a whirlwind. Nora began clearing out the garage to prepare it for Tribus Games, the company she, Daniel, and I were building together. Meanwhile, I went to the office to hand in my resignation. HR escorted me to my desk to collect my personal belongings, a single photo of Amelia before walking me out. As I drove home, a weight lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of freedom and purpose. When I returned, I found Nora still hard at work in the garage, her determination only deepening my affection for her. Together, we were building a future, one that finally felt like it was mine. Later that week, the movers delivered the items I'd placed in storage. We arranged the furniture in the proper rooms and stacked the boxes in the spare bedroom, which had originally been intended for Nora, except for those labeled as Amelia's, which we took directly to her room. A couple of weekends later, Amelia approached me, holding one of her old laptops. "Dad, I can't access this computer anymore. Can you help me get into it?" she asked. "Why on earth would you want to?" I replied, turning away from the whiteboard Nora and I had been using. By whiteboard, I meant the entire garage wall, which we had covered with special wallpaper to make it writable. We'd been brainstorming ideas for our next game, and most of the wall was now filled with sketches, flowcharts, and notes. "I haven't used this laptop since before you got hurt. It might have something interesting on it," she explained. "All right, let's take a look," I said, moving to my desk. After rummaging through a drawer, I found a green USB drive. Plugging it into the laptop's port, we rebooted the system. When Windows started as usual, I shut it down and entered the BIOS settings, changing the boot order to prioritize the USB drive. Using the recovery software, I accessed the system. The laptop's first partition held the operating system, but the second was encrypted. I reset the admin password and restarted the computer. With the new password, we logged in. But as the desktop loaded, my stomach sank. I stared at the screen before turning to Amelia. Amelia, did you install a camera system in our old house? What? No! Why would you even ask that? She yelled, clearly offended. I pointed to an icon on the desktop. That's the software for the cameras, so I'll ask again. Did you install them, or do you know who might have? It wasn't me, she exclaimed. Then her expression darkened. Oh God, that idiot? Who? I pressed. Ryan Carter, she replied, her voice seething with anger. Why do you think it was him? Nora asked, stepping closer. I used to let him borrow that laptop to go online when he came over, Amelia admitted. I nodded grimly and launched the camera software. A dialog box popped up, requesting the encryption key for the second partition. I canceled it, and the program loaded, but the live interface showed no active feeds. Nothing here? Amelia asked, peering over my shoulder. This is just the live view. It can't find the server, I explained. Then I spotted something in the menu. Wait, there's a library. I clicked the option, and rows of thumbnails appeared, each with a timestamp. 5 thumbnails per row, 3 rows visible, and a scroll bar indicating many more. Amelia gasped as the first video preview showed her former teacher standing without clothes in my old bedroom. Beside him, seated on the bed, was Sophie, my ex-wife. The next thumbnail showed the pair in Amelia's bedroom. The third, back in the master bedroom, featured them again. The fourth video stopped me cold. It was Sophie and me. The fifth showed Sophie and the teacher role-playing in my office, complete with a schoolgirl uniform and pigtails. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the thumbnails. Most were of Sophie and her lover, but mixed in were a few of me and her. Further down, I saw footage of Sophie with Terry Mansfield, our next-door neighbor. Then came videos with Liam Bennett, a former co-worker who had been fired. Nora filled in the missing detail. He'd been let go after being caught in bed with his wife, Chloe, by the company owner. The final rows were the worst. The earliest videos featured Ryan with Amelia, but over time they transitioned to exclusively show him with Sophie. I slammed the laptop shut, ending the nauseating trip down memory lane. I'm calling the police, I said, already dialing Detective Ethan Hayes. His number hadn't changed, and though my wife's case had gone cold, he'd maintained interest in solving it. I explained what we'd found, and he promised to investigate. It took a month before I heard back. Mr. Blackwood, Detective Hayes began, we've located your wife. And Ryan Carter? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. He's facing a long list of charges, possibly a state record, Hayes replied after a brief pause. I glanced around the garage where Amelia, Nora, and Daniel had stopped working to listen. Amelia had recently joined our company through her university's co-op program. Does she want to see me? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. Mr. Blackwood, Hayes said cautiously. The district attorney isn't pursuing charges against her. What? I shouted. What kind of idiot drops charges against someone caught on video conspiring to homicide me? She's not well enough to stand trial, Hayes explained. The doctors say she may never be competent. I'd like to hope otherwise, but the reports are clear. In what way? I demanded. You'll need to see for yourself. It's difficult to describe, and I think it's best you prepare for the worst, Hayes said softly. After hanging up, I explained everything to Nora, Amelia, and Daniel. Both Nora and Amelia insisted we leave immediately. Daniel, ever supportive, assured us he'd keep the office running in our absence. A week later, we followed Detective Hayes' directions and arrived at the state hospital. After checking in at reception, we were directed to the appropriate ward. A nurse asked us to wait while she paged the attending doctor. When he arrived, he escorted us to his office and began detailing Sophie's condition. Physically, she had suffered extensive injuries. She had lost her left eye, and her right leg had healed improperly after a break, requiring it to be rebroken and reset. Years of malnutrition had taken a toll on her body, leading to additional complications. As the doctor transitioned to her psychological state, his area of expertise, the picture grew even bleaker. Sophie had endured long-term, systematic misuse. Her captor had treated her as little more than a plaything, subjecting her to every twisted fantasy he could imagine. The constant degradation had left her unable to cope with freedom. The doctor warned us that her recovery would take years. And even then, there were no guarantees. A year after that sobering visit, Nora and I got married. The ceremony took place on a picturesque Florida beach near her parents' home. Her family welcomed Amelia with open arms, embracing her as the daughter they had always wanted. Amelia thrived under their care and love, experiencing the joy of having grandparents for the first time, something she barely remembered from her early years. 6 months into our marriage, we discovered Nora was pregnant. An ultrasound revealed we were having twins, a boy and a girl. With the due date fast approaching, we were still debating names, which added a bit of nervous excitement to the mix. Meanwhile, our first game turned out to be a resounding success. Strong retention rates and impressive lifetime value metrics allowed us to establish a steady monthly update cycle managed by our growing team. Our second game was in the final stages of its soft launch in Switzerland, South Korea, and Denmark. If its performance matched expectations, we planned to roll it out globally and expand the studio further. Amelia had been instrumental in our success, but I often had to remind her to focus on finishing her degree. She was already well on her way to becoming a paper millionaire, if she wasn't one already, but I emphasized the importance of completing her education. So far, she'd taken my advice to heart. Sophie now lives next door. Amelia insisted on being involved in her care, and I couldn't refuse. She's Sophie's only remaining family. With Amelia's help, Sophie has made steady progress. Most days, we can encourage her to stay dressed and maintain some semblance of routine, though she isn't ready to venture out in public yet. We've partnered with the University of Washington to provide Sophie with ongoing treatment. In exchange, I teach a game development class at the university. It's been a win-win for everyone involved. Sophie receives expert care, and I have the opportunity to mentor and scout potential talent for our studio's future. Life has been challenging, but it's also filled with unexpected blessings. Nora, Amelia, and our growing family have brought me a sense of peace I never thought I'd find.